We're from the Kingsman tailor's shop in London. Maybe you've heard of us?
Hello, and welcome to Film Rant. You might remember a few videos ago I showed you a list with my boys on it. Now, Matthew Vaughn is on that list, I just didn't show him. I'm a huge fan of his work. Kick-Ass is one of the best films I've ever seen, possibly in my top 5. Kingsman is fucking brilliant too. So how stoked was I when I found out that they announced Kingsman 2? Where are they going to take it? How's Eggsy going to work without Colin Firth? Oh no, wait, you gone done fucked it up! Spoilers ahead, go to the cinema and watch it if you don't want anything spoiled and all that shit. I'm too fucking annoyed to write this properly. Now I'll start my reviews by talking about the characters, so I'll just calm myself down a bit to talk about Julianne Moore. I'll deal with you in a minute, Firth. So, our villain is Poppy. In case you forget, her name is plastered everywhere, and you would forget because she's about as memorable as last year's X Factor winner. It's nothing to do with Julianne Moore's performance, she's an incredibly talented actress, but the shit she's had to work with here is borderline workplace abuse. She's like a shit Harley Quinn that sells the dankest weed in the world. When you go from having Samuel L. Jackson, who had so much charisma and character, to a completely underused and boring Julianne Moore, who I'm pretty sure spends her entire time in the movie behind a diner counter, it's a massive letdown. It's like making The Dark Knight and having the villain in The Dark Knight Rises be a little 14-year-old who's robbed some cider from the corner shop for him and his little bunch of whoppers to drink behind his skip on a Friday night. To be honest, Bane wasn't much better than that, but you get my point. Ms. Moore, ring the work rights helpline. You may have minced an employee in the movie, but you were the real employee who got fucking minced. Why was Channing Tatum in the movie? Again, massive fan of the lad, love him to bits. He's another guy on my boys list, but in this movie he's just totally ghosted. He's basically Kingsman 2's Roman Reigns. He causes a bit of a storm at the start, falls asleep for 2 hours and comes back right at the end. My only guess is he was filming Logan Lucky alongside this and couldn't fully commit, so they had to change the script a little bit. Speaking of Logan Lucky, I bet he's absolutely sick of hearing Take Me Home Country Roads. He has to be a major character in Kingsman 3. There's no real reason to give his character to a star like him. They could have easily got someone cheaper if they weren't going to be a major player in the wider picture. Judging by the ending, that's exactly what's going to happen, but I was a little bit disappointed we didn't get to see more of him in this movie. Halle Berry seems to just be a replacement for Mark Strong given what happens with him. She's okay, I suppose. I mean, she's likeable, she's serviceable, but there's nothing particularly unique about her. The only possible bit of interest was when she said she wanted to be an agent, but whiskey kept shutting her down. Maybe that would have been better if they weaved in some kind of glass ceiling style storyline where she fights to get herself in the boys club. I guess that's a bit big for a subplot, but it's the only interesting thing about her, so I want to see it expanded a bit. Look, just to clarify here, I have no issue with Colin Firth himself. Tremendous actor, loved him in the first one, but more importantly, I loved what happened to him in the first one. Savagely murders a lot of people in a church while being mind-controlled, realises what he's done and is met by Samuel L. Jackson outside, who explains that this is where he's going to tell him his evil plan and give him a chance to stop him before saying, "This ain't that kind of movie," and turning his brain into a Jackson Pollock painting while Eggsy watched. That was brilliant. It totally flips the tone of the movie and genuinely comes as a shock that they'd kill off such an important big name halfway through the movie. You could say it's almost as if Matthew Vaughn didn't expect to be doing a sequel, because it's blindingly fucking obvious that in the meeting room they were like, "Fuck, I'm not sure this is gonna sell, man. Like, why did we kill Colin? Why? We need him back, he's the answer." It's fine, look, we'll just write a really good plot that has a genuine reason and sufficient explanation to bring him back, it's all good. That explanation? Oh, we've got this magic gel stuff that stops brain damage and brings people back with amnesia. Are you fucking kidding me? Excuse the fact that it's the most bullshit plot device since Rihanna and Valerian, the fact that you're bringing back Colin Firth with a Jason Bourne machine doesn't even make sense. Surely in the first movie the Kingsman would have went to recover his body. How did the Statesman even know who he was? They don't know Kingsman exists until the second movie. It's just so fucking weak. It's atrocious writing. It really irks me that Matthew Vaughn can be so unnecessarily lazy in writing Colin Firth back into the franchise. I hated it in the trailer, and I hate it even more in the actual movie. It's not even like they do anything interesting with it. He's just the same character he was in the first one, after the brief amnesia phase, which ultimately amounts to nothing. If you're bringing him back, change him significantly. Fuck it, make him a villain, and make him and Eggsy conflict with each other. There's hints at both of those, but nothing comes of either. His shit revival completely undermines his death in the first movie. In fact, this is one of the only sequels that actively ruins its predecessor. Okay, maybe that's a bit far, the first movie is still brilliant, but one of the golden moments of it is now ruined forever. Cheers, Matty lad. Cheers, 20th Century Fox, you pair of lazy, greedy fucking idiots. I wouldn't care. I really enjoyed Mark Strong's death scene in this movie. I loved how it was done and it was sad to see him die. But immediately I thought, it doesn't matter man, because in Kingsman 3 they'll just hoist some fucking wonder glue on the Humpty Dumpty looking bastard and he'll be right as rain. I don't think I'll ever be alright with this decision. It's more disappointing than Jason Bourne. And that wound is still sore. There's a disappointing lack of action scenes in Kingsman 2. There is an absolute truckload of dialogue, which isn't a bad thing as most of it is decent. It just ends up making the film feel very, very long. It's lucky that Eggsy and Mark Strong are both good enough characters to carry the majority of the movie. However, what action there was brilliant, as is expected with Matthew Vaughn's movies. Some of it was a little too over the top, like it was trying too hard to be edgy, but the vast majority of it is thoroughly entertaining. I especially love the final set piece where Eggsy and Harry invade Poppy's base. That was a great fight and kind of well choreographed. I say kind of because I'm not convinced that half the scene was actually CGI, but I'll get into that later. I also like the commentary on drugs that comes into play about halfway through. I liked how the president was sort of happy that all of these illegal drug users were getting punished for their stupidity, but the counter-argument of explaining why people use drugs and that it's not just lowlifes who use them, but anybody from any background was a great way to introduce some deeper conflict in the movie. Hell, Julianne Moore's evil plan wasn't necessarily all that evil. Ultimately, she just wanted to legalise and regulate drugs, albeit for her own financial and social gain, but you know, as far as an evil psychopath views go, that ain't that bad. There's definitely more that could have been done with this plot thread, but in the absence of the brilliant class commentary the first one is rife with, I'll take this over a bland, lifeless film any day. The comedy is decent too. I love the dialogue in Kingsman movies, the mix of Eggsy's British slang and received pronunciation never gets old, and I think Taron Egerton has this weird chav charisma that makes him likeable, even though he's probably a bit of a prick. There could have been some hilarious banter focused on the cultural differences between Kingsman and Statesman, and there is a little when Mark Strong is explaining to Channing Tatum that proper whiskey doesn't have an E in it, it's made in Scotland and fuck you. We needed more banter like that. If the first movie explores class differences, then have this movie explore cultural differences. Granted, the UK and the US aren't worlds apart, but there's material to work with there. I didn't like what ended up happening to Whiskey. I totally bought that he was sort of working against the Statesman and Kingsman. There was something off about him from the very start, and that's down to Matthew Vaughn's direction and Pedro Pascal's excellent performance. But when the reveal comes as to why he's working against them, I could kind of see his viewpoint. He's not actively helping drug dealers or even directly working against the Statesman or Kingsman. He just wants to fail a mission so he can exact some kind of misguided revenge on the kind of people that killed his wife and son. I totally see that viewpoint. I don't agree with it, but I can sympathise with his reasoning. They could have really tied this in with the not everyone who uses drugs is bad storyline, but they didn't really go for it. I'm completely on board with the stance that he's in the wrong and Eggsy and Harry need to take him down, but did they really need to kill him? I don't even think they did, never mind killing him by putting him in the mincing machine, which should have been Julianne Moore going in there if anyone. It just felt far too extreme. It's like punishing your child for smashing their PlayStation controller in rage by force-feeding them dog shit and hanging them from the ceiling in the dark cellar with a shoelace. Shout out to Mum and Dad. It seems like this was in the movie just to be edgy, and nothing is more cringy than attempts to be edgy. Speaking of edgy, I can't decide if the bizarre inclusion of Elton John was hilarious or tacky. At first it was funny, but in the end it just went too far and felt more forced than an emo's smile. The visual effects were all over the place too. Some scenes look spectacular, like the whole set piece around the skylift, but the very first action scene where Eggsy was fighting Charlie in the car was just flat out ugly. The choreography was good and the ideas for the scene all worked, but it was really off-putting watching both characters warp around like they're doing the raddest Mr. Fantastic cosplay. I thought the effects looked a bit off in the trailer, but I put that down to post-production limitations and figured they'd be up to snuff in the final edit. Nope, they just really love 3D models on the Puppet tool and After Effects. Taron Egerton might get a role in a Slender Man movie after this, so I hope it all works out for him. Ultimately, Kingsman 2 feels like one of those forced sequels, like The Hangover 2 or Taken 2, where the studio really wasn't expecting such a giant success of the first movie and decides to milk the cow for all it's worth. Only, unlike The Hangover and Taken, the Kingsman universe has depth and intrigue. I would have loved to see how Eggsy and Lancelot led the Kingsman, but they killed her near the start. There's another load of character development gone down the shitter for no reason. Ah, it's fine, she'll just have hidden a fridge or something. I enjoyed the Statesman and the implication that maybe every country has a Kingsman equivalent hidden somewhere, but the organisation isn't really in the movie enough. The sequel needed to expand the universe more, and it just didn't do enough. I'm also beginning to think that Matthew Vaughn is a bit of a one-trick pony and it's getting a bit stale. The scene in Kick-Ass where Hit Girl rescues Kick-Ass and Big Daddy is possibly my favourite movie scene of all time. The scene where Big Daddy invades the warehouse with the shotgun is also top-notch. The church scene in Kingsman 1 is the highlight of that movie. Each of these scenes sort of builds on top of the previous and they improve. But in Kingsman 2, none of the action scenes are as good as any of those. They're all technically impressive, but they fail to wow me in the same way. Taron Egerton also has said that Vaughn loves creating controversy with his movies, which just makes me think that he's got no genuine talent for writing. He's like one of those annoying people on Facebook who are always whining about drama in their life when they really live for it and cause it themselves. Kingsman 2's controversial scene was the one where Eggsy has to insert a tracking device up Poppy Delavigne's vagina, because hey, that's edgy and graphic, right? But does it make sense to the plot? No. Does it fuck? Kingsman 2 has its qualities. The action is decent enough, the comedy is good, and it does have some interesting narrative commentary. But I think it's the first movie I've ever watched that has completely put me off a director. Sure, lots of directors I like have made a bad movie, but it's often just due to misdirection and difficulties. Kingsman 2 is the product of shoddy writing, painfully childish direction and execution, and sheer greed. Colin Firth should not have been present, and the fact that they brought him back in such a disgustingly poor way is utterly unforgivable. Kingsman: The Golden Circle gets 2.5 frames out of 5. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time on Film Rant.